Let me show you what was my first ever project. If you haven't worked with silicone mold or air dry clay before, this is the perfect small and easy little project to do. I'm using these two molds, but any 2 or 3 molds would do. The technique is going to be exactly the same whatever you have at home. I'm going to use Jovi air dry clay, which is my favorite. I'm going to use my palette knife to take off the excess from the mold, but you can use any other tool too. We'll need some wood glue and a brush to adhere the clay on the top of the terracotta plot. Any brush would do, especially the ones that are not high quality. So let's get started. We are going to take a big chunk of air dry clay because the molds are quite big, especially the first one. I'm not gonna time lapse this part because I want you to see how I push the clay into the molds every crevice to make sure that I'm going to get the full details. And also, if you don't have enough clay to work with, you can always put some extra on the top of it. You only need to make sure basically that you push it in very well and to work everything together. Whatever I have left over, I work it together with my hands and I put it back into the package to avoid drying it out. I usually go back, especially with the big molds, to push the clay in one more time just to make sure that I'm gonna get the full details. Then I get my clean palette knife and bit by bit I'm going to take off the excess clay. I also use the excess clay for my next mold too. I just work it together a little bit. I'm putting it into the mold. Again, I recommend to make sure that you push it into every single detail, especially the ones which are finer details. For larger molds, I actually use this technique to take it out because there's less chance that the clay and the shape breaks in the process. Oops, I just realized that I left out this piece of clay. Let's just put it away very quickly. Sorry about that. So depending on the size of the mold, I usually loosen the mold around the clay. It's a little bit easier to take it out this way. Now we have our shapes out, so let's get gluing. The terracotta pot has a porous surface, which means you can stick the clay directly onto it. And I'm going to use this mold to actually stabilize the pot while I'm gluing onto it. This is a trick I learned by myself. As I mentioned before, I use wood glue to stick the clay onto the surface. We're going to start with this big piece. You don't have to use a lot of glue, but make sure that you cover the piece of clay fairly and everywhere. When you're done brushing the glue onto the clay, try to carefully position the piece of clay onto the pot, like this, and make sure you push it down gently and try not to compromise the details of the clay. Gonna repeat exactly the same process with this little butterfly. For this particular project, I actually decided to put the butterfly into the middle, creating a different design. But there are no rules or limitation how you can use these kind of molds and the clay. After everything has dried, we can start painting. Glue and the clay usually dries within a few hours, especially if you can put it into direct sunlight. I personally usually leave it for a night. You can use any type of paint. I usually use my own chalky paints because they're much easier to work with. Also, I recommend to use two different kind of brushes. One is a bristle brush. I use this type for dry brushing, and the other one is for full colors. Let's start with the base color. When this layer of paint is fully dry, I'm going to dry brush a different color on the top of the design, so it's gonna highlight everything. Also, you can leave it however you want and use different type of colors or even metallic paint. With dry brushing, you don't need a lot of paint on the brush, and sometimes I use the cap of the paint pot for convenience. Now we're just gonna lightly brush the different color on the top of the design, and I absolutely love the process because you're gonna see the whole design just gonna pop. It's up to your taste how you actually like your pot painted and with what kind of color. I'm just gonna show you here that you can actually do different designs every time if you want to paint the top of the pot as well, or just leave it as it is. Here we have completed my first ever project, and for the next one I'm going to use a different kind of surface with a little bit more elaborate design. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye!